And you're very welcome along to a very special edition of Friday Night Racing. It's called Back on Track, Lessons from a Sporting Life. We've got an all-star cast for you, literally and metaphorically. Ursula Jacob, Kate Harrington, Senna Nuupu and Nikki Daly are going to join us on the show. We're streaming the full thing live on Thursday afternoon, and it's also going to go out on Thursday evening on Off the Ball and Newstalk, and on Friday evening in the regular Friday Night Racing slot as well. So it is all with thanks to HRI, who are supporting the Breast Cancer Ireland race day at Leopardstown this Friday. It's a full day of racing. I'm going to tell you about it in just a minute. The first race goes to post at 1:55. The last race of the day is at 5:25, and it is the Breast Cancer Ireland Ladies Cup Day. That race is at 5:25 p.m. And the reason that this is all happening is because there's 3,700 new cases diagnosed of breast cancer in Ireland every year. 1 in 9 women are diagnosed with breast cancer in their lifetime. Survival rates are improving and getting better all the time, currently at 85%, which means 689 people still lost their lives every year in Ireland as a result of breast cancer. So we're asking you today to dig deep, donate what you can at breastcancer.com/donate, or text the word CURE to 50300, and that is to donate to Breast Cancer Ireland. So it's 50300, just text the word CURE, and that'll be a €4 donation, and the vast majority from most networks will indeed end up going to Breast Cancer Ireland. So it's all for a great cause, and we're delighted to help support it here on Friday Night Racing this week. And as I said, our theme is Back on Track, Lessons from a Sporting Life. Our first two guests I'm delighted to welcome to the show this afternoon, Ursula Jacob and Kate Harrington. You're both very welcome. Thanks very much for joining us. Everybody in their pink today, even Johnny. He looks good.
It's only by coincidence for me.
Well, that's good. Johnny looks good in his, we think. It just about fits him.
Yeah, definitely rocking that pink t-shirt.
Yeah, no, perfect with the skin tone too. That's enough embarrassing for him this week. Ursula, I wanted to start with you. We're interested in sporting lives and how they come about. I guess if you had wanted to be anything other than a hurler, were there any opportunities? Were you allowed to do anything? Say you wanted to be a rugby player or a hockey player, was that going to be encouraged, or was it strict, you're a hurler and that's it?
Well, my mum and dad were very encouraging across the board. You know, they were heavily involved in the GAA, and I suppose they were a massive influence on my career. I suppose from the parish that I'm from, Owlert in County Wexford, it's steeped in GAA, and I suppose it's the common thing that young and old people get involved in, you know, in Owlert. So I suppose I did have choice when I was younger. You know, my mum would have brought us to gymnastics, to music. You know, I would have tried out many sports when I was in secondary school, but I was always drawn back to camogie and the GAA. My mum and dad both represented Wexford, you know, at inter-county level, and they both represented their clubs. And I suppose, you know, from the age of probably 5 or 6, I remember being out on the front lawn with my brothers and sister, pucking the ball. So in some ways, you know, I probably had no other choice. I was the youngest of 4, and they all played hurling and camogie. So I probably wasn't going to steer too far away from that. But definitely, mum and dad were big influences, and the biggest influence on my career. But, you know, they would have been very open to, as long as I was happy and enjoying what I was doing, they didn't really mind. But obviously, it was an added bonus when I stuck with camogie, and I've played it for the past 30 years, really.
Yeah, and you've done all right as well. I think I'm right in saying that of the entire house, you have the most All-Stars. Is that correct?
Well, it's the running joke with myself and my dad. He was Wexford's first All-Star back in the 70s, and he's got 3 in total. So I always had the bragging rights over him. I've got 4. So he, unfortunately, he's not going to break that record now at this stage when he's in his mid-70s. So I can hold that one over him forever anyway. So it's just a bit of running joke. But look, it's always nice to be rewarded with an All-Star. And, you know, but obviously winning the All-Irelands would always have been the most important factor for me.
Can I just ask you about that? Like, obviously the individual awards are important, and the team winning is huge as well. But in a house where there is somebody who is such a legendary figure in the locality, like, he's just your dad. At the end of the day, that's when you're growing up, that's what it looks like. But when you're out in the public and you see people coming up to meet him, or you see people nudging their kids and going, that's Wexford's first All-Star there. What was that actually like for you growing up?
We've great memories of when, you know, in particular when we were travelling up to Wexford games, and in particular in 1996 when we last won the All-Ireland. And I remember at the start of that year, rather than driving up from Wexford because there was, you know, the roads weren't as good, we used to travel up by train. And I mean, it just felt like Daddy was, a huge celebrity to us, because everyone seemed to want to get his opinion on how Wexford were going to do and get pictures with him and get his autograph. And Dad would be very modest and quiet in his own way, but always would give time to anyone who wanted to talk about hurling, and in particular Wexford hurling. So he absolutely loved it, and I suppose we got really used to it as well, that we always nearly ended up getting the earliest train possible to Dublin, because we always knew that we were going to be delayed walking from the train station to Croke Park, because Dad would be stopped probably 10, 15 times. What do you think today, Mick, or whatever? But at the end of the day, and at the back of it all, he was still only our dad, and we probably never allowed him to get too big of a head over it or anything. But he still enjoys it to this day, and I suppose in the last year or so, he's really missing the element of going to the matches and that. But it's great that, the games are coming back on the telly, and at least it's that topic of conversation that he loves so much, that even now that when he's getting out that bit more, he's meeting people and they can talk about the games at the weekend and look forward to the championship. But yeah, it was a great excitement, as I said, especially during 1996 when Wexford had such a brilliant year.
Yeah, look, that we'll talk about that as well, that whole kind of importance of visibility. It was part of the 20 by 20 campaign, the whole hashtag can't see, can't be. Kate, from your perspective, obviously having an unbelievably successful parent is something that you've had to live with and grow up with, and obviously there's great aspects to that as well. Was there ever any sense of pressure? Was there ever any sense that you had to follow in the footsteps and there's a very high watermark for the achievements?
No, never really. Mum was always kind of let you go and do your own thing and follow your own feet. And like, I kind of probably started off eventing, and like Mum did, and she obviously went to substitute Olympic one substitute Olympic games one year when it was called off, and then her horse actually got injured the second Olympics she went to. But I was always involved in eventing, and then my eventing kind of accidentally led into racing. And probably my race riding was the one thing, because Mum didn't really do that I had a little bit up on her. But now working alongside her and training with her at home, no, it's very good, and there's no real pressure. Kind of can follow in her own footsteps, but do your own thing and make your own path along the way.
That pathway is one of the things that we wanted to talk to both of you about, and just how easy or otherwise it might be. I guess in your instance, Kate, every day you were watching somebody being a high achiever in the industry. So it was a fairly straightforward pathway for you, I suspect.
Yeah, it was always, I did my leaving cert, and I always remember my late dad joking with me. He's like, why are you... I was upset because I kind of hadn't done very well in my mocks, and he's like, sure, you're not going to use your college education, like you're going to end up working here, like, do you really need to go to college? And like, that was like complete reverse psychology for me, because I like then the next 6 weeks put my head down and was like, right, I'm getting those points to get into UCD and get my degree, which I did in social science, politics and social policy. And the day I left UCD, as you can imagine, I have not used that once, and was straight back down to Moon and working from home.
And from your perspective, Ursula, the game has changed beyond all recognition since you were the youngest of four hurling in the back garden. Like, is it something that you've seen and been particularly aware of, the explosion in opportunities for girls particularly to play underage sports, particularly GAA, I suspect, in Ireland?
Yeah, and I think it's really developed and grown in the past number of years. When I look back, when I probably started playing with Wexford first, we were playing 12 aside, and now it's the full 15 aside. And I think that's really developed the game of camogie, and in particular, for young girls, the more that it's in line with the hurling rules and the hurling dimensions of the pitch, I think it's really brought on the game. And even the skill level, I look at my local club now, and the input from coaches and mentors has been a huge thing in the last couple of years. They're really trying to hone the skills really nice and early with the kids, but not to overdo it either, because at the end of the day, when you're maybe 6, 7 years of age, it should be, the element of fun, having the small bit of competitiveness there, but also allowing them to develop their skills, both physically, tactically, technically. I think all of them are really important. But I think in the last number of years, camogie as a sport has really developed, and that goes down to a lot of hard work behind the scenes, maybe things that we don't see all the time, and definitely underage, in my own locality has massively improved. with facilities, more resources, excellent coaches and mentors, and that's only led to the development to really improve in the last number of years.
Just as well, Ursula, how much is the explosion in terms of interest? And you look at the attendances at like some of the All-Ireland finals in recent years compared to when we were younger. And I've wondered about this as well in terms of like the mothers and, the sisters and the daughters who would have long gone to, watch the lads play, and that was grand. But there seems to be like a real sense of empowerment and togetherness among women in sport now, that they go along as well to watch, women play at the highest level, and massive female attendances at these games, where they feel now that they have something special that they're part of that's actually growing exponentially as well.
That's it. And I think, women first and foremost have to support one another. It's all well and good saying we need more men and males watching the games and watching sport, but women need to support women as well. And that's where the likes of camogie and ladies football have really progressed in the last couple of years. I look at it in the last 5-6 years, every year the camogie finals and the ladies football finals have increased. And I think some of the reasons for that, visibility definitely has, broadened in the last couple of years. Even in terms of camogie point of view, there's more games being televised. Last year, with COVID, all of the senior championship games except one was live streamed. So I think that the more that people witness the skills and these high achieving athletes perform out on the pitch, the more you would be encouraged to go and see these in person. And then also one thing that's really aiding that is the fact that when more camogie games or ladies football games are played alongside the men's games, get the crowds in that little bit earlier. Now I know in these times we can't get crowds at matches, but the more visible these players, get out there to the wider audience, I think that can only improve it. But I definitely would always encourage that us women have to support women first and foremost, and then that's where you get the brothers, the uncles, the cousins, the friends of these athletes to support them in person as well. And we've seen it in the last couple of years, especially at the ladies football final and the camogie as well.
The irony of that is, if you have like a Dublin Leinster Championship game probably, and you have a Dublin Leinster Championship game, and if you had the Dublin ladies playing before the Dublin footballers, you'd actually have a far bigger crowd, because there'd be nearly more interest in the ladies than the senior team, because
certainly in Leinster anyway, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And not having but like that's definitely something interesting.
Yeah, without a doubt, because yeah, without a doubt. And I've really, I know I've heard people talk in the past, we want to keep camogie, with its own headline. I don't find it insulting if I was playing a camogie match and I was playing in front of the Limerick and Galway hurlers. I find it that it's equal billing. It allows the camogie players to have their moment. It's about promoting then that game in front of the Limerick and Galway hurling game. And, having these players, whether it's the Anne Daltons of Kilkenny, Gemma O'Connor's, whoever is playing for the camogie teams, have them on the same billing as a Grode Hegarty, as a TJ Reid. And the more familiar people get with these players, it can only enhance and promote the game even further.
I think it's a great idea, and you'd hope that as the organisations come closer together, this is something that they begin to experiment with, because there's been this whole notion that the only thing that can go before the All-Ireland senior final is the minor final, and I'm not really sure if 17-year-olds are actually ready for the pressure of playing an All-Ireland final day before those big crowds, whereas actually the senior women might be. And I know that there've been talk about the Joe McDonagh final being there. Maybe you could have a triple header. Kate, I'm interested in your take on other sports as well, because we've talked a good bit about racing. I'll get your thoughts on how racing is done. Obviously, your mum was a trailblazer, and we've seen an incredible moment in racing where the best jockey in the world at the moment is female. What's your take on the other sports and how well they're doing in this, just as a casual observer even?
I think on a casual observer, I think the 2020 initiative was absolutely spectacular. I think it brought a lot more women's sports, especially in Ireland, to the fore, like women's rugby, women's camogie, women's football, women's hockey. I think it's really brought it a lot more to the fore. Like, I have to say, I've been very lucky within, from a horsey background. When you're riding a horse, it doesn't matter if you're male or female, you're on a level playing field. So from when I've been a young kid, I've never seen the difference between, because especially in 3-day eventing, female presence would be a lot stronger than a male presence. And then when I went into racing, going into a male-dominated kind of weigh room and a few females, it never really daunted me because I was like, I know my riding ability is equal. But I think the whole female push, and you can see it even, like I know from just even this week walking around Kilcullen here where I live, like you can see there's so many kids out playing GAA, soccer, everything all around the place, tennis, everything. And I think even what the women's hockey have done over the last number of years has absolutely been phenomenal.
How do we get more jockeys though, Kate? Because you look at the numbers. Just Ger and I've had a debate about this, and we have our own beliefs as to how you push it or whatever. And I think maybe the fact that people in general are getting bigger is going to definitely be to the young girls' advantage because they'll have a weight kind of making the weight advantage. But there simply are not anywhere near enough female jockeys, jumps or flat in Ireland at the moment. How do we change that?
You know what? I'm really seeing it a lot more on, say, a base level, employment level, like within our yard. I'm seeing a lot more over the last 3-4 years, a lot more female riders coming in, working, starting then to get their jockey's license, and they're working their way up through maybe the point, getting a few rides on the track. And you even see it, there's a lot more female apprentices. I think a number of years ago in race, it used to be 60% male, and then 40% female. And I think now the last number of years, it's been definitely 50-50 or even more female in race. And that's when in transition year, when the guys they go to race and they become apprentices and then they work their way up through the flat ranks in that sense. And I think we're definitely seeing at a lower level, a lot more females starting to break through. And, like, Rachel's been a real trailblazer over the last number of years. And she's really inspired a lot of young women to take their hand into jump racing. And even over in the likes of England, Holly Doyle, and then there's a young girl, Safi Osborne's coming up the ranks. And there's plenty of really young female talent coming through.
And they need support. I guess that was the debate was the debate we had a couple of weeks ago, and about the way the French have gone at it. But it's a huge opportunity. I suppose that's the main thing, and that the sport really needs to capitalise on that, because every sport needs to capitalise on the window of opportunity that has been crowbarred open by the 20 by 20 campaign.
Yes, completely. And I think, like, the way Rachel went up the ranks, Rachel never went on, oh, I'm female, I'm better than the males, X, Y, and Z. Rachel just let her record on the racetrack do the talking. And I think that's always been my attitude, kind of, you go, let the racing do the track, let your wins go do the talking. And like you see it with Siobhan Rutledge, like she's riding plenty of winners up in Dundalk during the winter, and she's now getting a lot more opportunity on the track now during the turf season, which is great to see.
And her progress has been just so great to watch because, she was a 10-pound claimer, and she's just, Dundalk has given her that opportunity and to really, really grow. And, Holly Doyle riding for Aidan O'Brien in the Dante as well. It's fantastic stuff. And just to ask you, Ursula, do you feel that you are part of a revolution in terms of the difference the last 10, 20 years in terms of female sport?
I really would agree with that. I think Kate, mentioned, the likes of even Katie Taylor, Rachel Blackmore, the Irish hockey team. We're witnessing, we're going to look back in years to come and say, around this period of sport, the women are really leading the way. It was fantastic to see what Rachel Blackmore has achieved. And I'd agree with that. Like, she's a jockey. She's not going around saying she's a female rider. She just is Rachel Blackmore. And that's the way you have to view it as well. Katie Taylor, a phenomenal boxer. She's not constantly saying, I'm a woman's boxer. We all know she's fighting in the women's rounds, but she sees herself as an athlete. It's the same with the Irish hockey team. And that's the way it is. And it's great to be actually witnessing this now. It's not, we're only talking about that. It happened 20 years ago. It's actually happened live and now. And I think we really need to start fully appreciating the top class athletes we have in Ireland, because, right across the board, whether it's the Irish hockey team, the rugby team, the soccer team, we've got some really, really high achieving athletes, and they're really role models for younger girls. Because I know when I was growing up, maybe I didn't have that kind of visible role models because I wasn't seeing it on the television. Whereas week in, week out now, we're seeing more and more of these games or athletes on the telly, getting centre stage on the telly, and that will only improve as the years go on as well. And I just think the more that we see these people on TV, the more that we're going to aspire to be like that, and the younger generation will be influenced by that as well.
It seems to me, Ursula, that most of the revolution in equality in the GAA is happening almost at a club level. And I mean, obviously this week there was the announcement about the grants, but that clubs got themselves organised and realised that there were loads of young girls and women who wanted to play the sport, and they needed to put teams on. Now, it hasn't been perfect, and we've detailed stories over the years about all sorts of shenanigans that were going on where pitches would suddenly become unavailable, there wouldn't be hot water in the showers. But the progress that's been made hasn't been made by the GAA at central level pairing up with the LGFA and with the Camogie Association. It's actually because clubs are deciding that we're going to be equal here. The under-10s boys and the under-10s girls, they're the same. They get the same access to the same amount of resources and funding. And, you know, it tends to be the most interested parents who make that happen. I wonder what's your experience been like of that, and how important is the grassroots bubbling up in actually shaping policy?
Yeah, without a doubt. I just look at my own club. We've always kind of had the one club vision where it doesn't matter if it's the underage boys, the underage girls, the senior team, the senior ladies team, or the senior men's team. We've actually been very lucky that we've been always treated very equally. You know, we've got the same access to the local gym in the GA complex. We've got access to the pitches on a weekly basis. So I never felt it too much when I was growing up that, you know, the men got preferential treatment above us. I have to say that within our GA club, we've been very lucky as female athletes that we've always been highly respected. I would agree that I would like to see that the Camogie Association and the LGFA would merge with the GA, though, because I think if we're all under the one umbrella, they'll all, you know, everyone will work that little bit better. We saw there back in December, the GPA and the WGPA merged together. I think that was a positive move for intercounty players, because now they're all seen as a joint group rather than two separate organisations. And that can only benefit intercounty ladies players as much as the men. So, you know, even this week we saw Minister Chambers announce that, you know, male and female intercounty players are going to receive the same funding going forward. So all these little things are really, you know, important.
Yeah, and look, that creates the pathway and those role models. It just becomes this kind of thing which has its own internal momentum. I think it's the point you make, Kate, about the fact that there will be kids who are watching Rachel Blackmore's success thinking, I can do that, as opposed to the previous generation who might have wanted to do it but didn't actually have anybody who'd smashed through that glass ceiling.
Yeah, exactly. Like people's, say, my role model growing up, like say when I was starting to race was like AP McCoy, Ruby Walsh. They're like the people you want to aspire to be. But now people are like, young girls are now aspiring to be Rachel Blackmore. Like I know Robbie Power's young daughter, Emma, she's 2 years old, and like, if Daddy doesn't win, I hope she goes, Mummy, did Rachel Blackmore win? And like, it's you know, like she's 2 years old and she's actually saying, I want Rachel to win. And it's lovely to see that. Like if Daddy didn't win, I hope Rachel wins. And it's lovely with a young kid to see that that kind of coming through at that young age now already. And I just think the next 10 years we're going to see, Johnny, you were touching on how is the dynamic going to change. I can see it even in our employment in our yards. You have like a lot of young girls transition year. We get a lot of kids in the locality coming in. They do their 1 week for a month, or 1 day for a month, and like they get involved and then they want to come work at the weekends, and you have a really good steady flow. And it's been a lot of girls over the last year and a half or so, which is great to see.
Yeah, and I think one of the things with Rachel as well is because Rachel is a woman, we almost forget that the story of Rachel Blackmore and the story of 2021 is actually about a jockey almost as much as it is about like the fact that she's a pioneer in terms of women in sport, because Rachel came from a position where she wasn't really going anywhere as a jockey, full stop. Whether she was male or female, that didn't matter. And she also came along and did what she did at Cheltenham and Aintree at a time when racing really, really needed a lift. And she just did this as a jockey that just worked really hard. She's a reluctant ambassador for everything that she is, because she just puts her head down and works. And it's kind of graft and talent. And I guess, Kate, my question is, like, she's always come across as that. She was never anything that she isn't. She was just talented and and she was in a situation where her career could have basically ended, and nobody, you know, outside of racing would have batted an eyelid. But she got on with it, and she has become, as Ger said, one of the best jockeys in the world.
Yeah, exactly. Like, she was at a stage, she was riding in point to points, and some weekends, that's, as an amateur, you might get paid and you might get paid. And you know, she was with Shark Hanlon at the time, and he said he would have a lot more opportunities for her if she did turn professional. And I actually remember, I think we were riding in a ladies' race in Limerick at the, one day, and she'd had a few rides over hurdles that day for the Shark, and she was riding in the bumper. And I remember her saying to us in the weigh room, I think it was, we were all crammed in there because, as usual, the ladies' changing room in Limerick was quite small because there'd only normally be one or two of us, but there was probably 6 or 7 of us in there that day. And she said to all of us that she was going to turn professional. And I just remember thinking, I was like, that's a big move. Like, and she was like, Shalise, then if I get a few rides, I'm guaranteed she'll get paid. And you know,
what did the rest of them say, actually? Because, like, what was it? This is a nice story, because this is a snapshot of female jockeys at the time being told this by Rachel first.
Like, it's like when you do turn professional, like, you're riding over jumps the whole time, and like, whereas she might have been riding in point to point, run at a lot to over 3 miles, a lot slower pace, you're not going to get the hard falls like you would on the track, say, during the summer. And like, kind of, I remember being like, God, it's going to be tough work, like the falls and stuff. Like, I remember, like, even after, I was like, are we as hardy as the males or whatever? Like, you know, you've got to be very, very tough mentally to be able to, like, we even saw Rachel at Cheltenham this year. What did she, on the Thursday, had 2 or 3 falls. She picked herself back up and went out there and rode, or it was the Wednesday, rode Sir Gerhard in the bumper and won. And like, she's phenomenal in that sense. But she just put her head down and worked. And I remember I think that was going into the summertime, and you know, she really put her head down, and the Shark gave her plenty of opportunities. And then a lot of other people started to take up and notice. And like, I even remember when she was champion conditional, she was there ready to get her prize, and she was riding in the big handicap hurdle. And she was like, oh my God, I'm riding a race for Willie Mullins. And she went out that day and she had an awful fall, had to go to hospital. But lo and behold, Rachel dusted herself off a couple of hours later and was back at the party to collect her conditional jockey title. And like, that just shows you what Rachel is. She's tough, she's hardy, she's breaking new ground. And, you know, I don't know where she's going to stop.
Yeah, no, that we hadn't heard that before. That's a great story. I wanted to ask you one final question, Ursula, about the recovery from lockdown and just how important it's going to be that whatever happens this year in terms of the high-profile women's matches, in particular at senior level, that there's no backsliding, that they're back elevated to the point that they were pre-lockdown.
That's it. As I would have mentioned in last year during the lockdown, all of the inter-county senior games were live streamed, and I'd like to see that continue this year because, you know, at the moment there's not going to be any spectators at the games, so it's important that we still get that visibility. We get to see these players playing at the group stages, even at club level. Last year there was so many live streaming of games, and that was so important as well, because at the heart of the community, the GAA clubs are so important, and I think that will drive the game further along. And, you know, we have to, you know, to break that glass ceiling where, you know, camogie and ladies football have to push through to, you know, to stay relevant, because there's so many options now. You know, as a young girl, when you're looking out there, you see so many, you know, role models like the Katie Taylors, the Rachel Blackmores, the Nikki Dailies, whoever, that you want to keep them in the GAA and you want them to excel at their level. So that has to start right at the grassroots at club level and then progress out to inter-county.
All right. It's funny that she just does mention that about the game and no crowds, because just briefly, Kate, this thing on Friday at Leopardstown, this could become a big annual event in terms of like getting a lot of people to attend it, to support the charity, to have a proper Friday night out at one of the nicest tracks in the world, arguably.
Yeah, exactly. And it was really starting, I think it was when the last time I had crowds in 2019, it was really starting to gather momentum, and it was the first 3 years were absolutely brilliant. And it's been a bit of a pity that we haven't been there the last 2 years, but it was getting momentum, and I hope that next year we can all be back on track, all wearing pink and having a great day for breast cancer awareness.
Are you going to take the winner first?
I think that just looking at the entries, it's Siobhan Rutledge. I honestly think, Kate, we're going to talk so much more about this girl. We had her on the show, I don't know when, it was a few months ago. Her manner was just absolutely class and she has this beautiful style on a horse where she just puts horses to sleep, honed her skills at Dundalk kind of in the winter series, and it's riding a horse for Tony Martin, who I think will be well fancied, and I think it'd be a really appropriate winner for Siobhan. She's a brilliant ambassador for the sport, even though she probably doesn't know it herself yet.
Yeah, she certainly is, and I think she's definitely one for anyone's notebooks listening in, because she's definitely going to be a lady we're going to be hearing a lot about in the coming years.
All right, well, look, I want to remind everybody that they can actually donate, and that's the point of today. Text the word CURE to 50300 to donate to Breast Cancer Ireland. You can also get onto the website breastcancer.com/donate. This Friday Night Racing special is all with thanks to HRI, who are supporting the Breast Cancer Ireland race day at Leopardstown this Friday. So my thanks to Ursula and to Kate there for joining us for the first of our two panels. We've got Nikki Daly and Senny Nwupo standing by, and they're going to be in part two. This is Back on Track, Lessons from a Sporting Life. Stay tuned. Okay, it's a very special Friday Night Racing for you this week. Today is all with thanks to HRI, who are supporting the Breast Cancer Ireland race day at Leopardstown this Friday. We've talked a little bit about why this is important, but 3,700 new cases are diagnosed of breast cancer in Ireland each year. 1 in 9 women are diagnosed with breast cancer in their lifetime. The survival rates are improving, but they're at 85%, which means 689 people still lose their lives every year because of this disease. And while advances are being made, continued investment is really important. That's why we're delighted to support this. And as Johnny pointed out yesterday, hopefully this becomes a massive annual fixture and the crowds throng when we're all allowed to go back out in public and have the crack. I'm delighted to say our second two guests on our theme this week, which is Back on Track, Lessons from a Sporting Life, are Senny Nwupo and Nikki Daly. You're both very welcome to the show. Thanks a million for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Nikki, if I could start with you, most people are going to know you because of your exploits with the hockey team. Is it fair to say that motor racing is actually your favourite sport?
I was going to ask for if Gaelic games are her favourite sport, actually.
I'd say, it's okay to have a number of passions, and I think maybe motorsport was probably my first passion because it's the sport that I was born into. I've followed my dad's career since I was very young, and my uncle was a Formula 1 driver, and my cousin's now racing in the IndyCar series in America. So it's just something that's been part of my life since I was born. So, is it my number one love? Maybe a little bit, but I suppose my own sporting journey really is in hockey. So, in terms of a passion for what I have done in my sporting life, then I would consider hockey the kind of number one passion in that sense.
Yeah, I didn't mean to go. Is it like these
aren't pick one over the other?
These aren't in competition. Yeah, it's not an either or. But like you've studied to be able to work in the sport of motor racing.
Yeah, I studied mechanical engineering for my undergrad here in Ireland, and then I went to the UK and I did a master's in motorsport engineering. So, I suppose, going back, maybe I would have liked to have been a racing driver, but it never really kind of panned out that way. And I wanted to get involved in the sport. Like I said, I've always had a passion for it, and studying engineering seemed like the main kind of route in there. And I went and I worked for a motor racing team in the States in the IndyCar series, and it was amazing, fantastic experience. And from that, I suppose I realized there was very few women actually, participating in the sport, both on track and off track. And I had just such an unbelievable positive experience as a female, maybe in a male-dominated sport, that I felt I wanted to, share this experience and open up this sport to as many young girls as I could. So when I came back to Ireland, I set up a platform called Formula Female, which was to, I suppose, highlight the different roles involved in the sport and the number of women that actually are involved in different series all over the world, and just what the career opportunities were in motorsport and what they could potentially offer. And so I launched the Go Girls Karting Initiative in conjunction with Motorsport Ireland and CJJ Motorsports back in 2019. And since that, we've introduced over 500 young schoolgirls to motorsport. They've got in behind the cart of the wheel of a cart, so they can experience what it's like to be a racing driver. But they've also been, given that hands-on experience of what it's like maybe to be an engineer, and it's just something that they've never had exposure to before. So it's, you know, trying to give them that little bit of experience and open up something else in their life that they may never have considered.
Isn't that that's the mad thing, because we've often had discussions here about, like, you know, we talked to Kate Harrington. Kate has absolutely come through sport. Come through racing. Ursula Jacob immersed in camogie and hurling. But, like, I've made the point, if you put a kid on a horse and that kid had to, you know, ride a horse for a week, he or she would, there's a 50-50 chance, if not more, that they've just become addicted. You became mad into that because of your background. So how do we get kids into more sports when they're younger? Because there's every chance that there's something that's just missed in their life that they didn't get the chance to actually partake in.
Yeah, well, I suppose that's part of the reason why I wanted to launch the Go Girls initiative, was to basically, you know, like you said, a lot of motorsports, people who get involved in motorsport tend to come from that background. So, you know, how do you reach all of the people that don't have a background in motorsport and don't know anything about the sport? And so the Go Girls is an initiative open to all, 13 to 16-year-olds all over Ireland, from, you know, whatever their backgrounds are, wherever they live, you know, may never have been to a racetrack before, to give them that experience. And I think that, you know, having initiatives like that where we can open up as many sports to young girls and boys, that they can, you know, you just give them a broader sense of what's out there for them, and give them an opportunity, I suppose.
You can just see Sene is just there. She's looking, she's like thinking, what would I be if I'd been a rally driver? Like, how would my life have been? When can I do this now?
This is, honestly, it's amazing, all the work you're doing, Nikki. It's I'm just thinking how inspiring it is.
I'll get you out in the carts, Sene.
I would love that. Jesus.
I was thinking the exact same thing, and just how there's a generation of people who are finding stuff that isn't happening, and then instead of complaining about it, they're just doing it and making that platform be available to new people. And so I guess you've had a front row seat, really, for the explosion in interest in the women's rugby team over the last decade and a half or so. What do you think was behind the explosion in interest, and are we capitalising enough on that level of interest that we're seeing?
Yeah, I think rugby, like all sports, is on a journey, you know, in terms of what participation bases look like. And I suppose, you know, the level of interest and the relation to visibility in terms of young kids, what they see nowadays as being something they want to give a go. So I think from that perspective, it's certainly, from a rugby perspective, has certainly grown over the last decade. Having seen, you know, the way it's transitioning. At the same time, I see so many kids get involved in other sports as well, which is brilliant. I've always been of the advocacy of young kids trying all sports, especially when they're young. And then you notice sort of the, you know, different types of talent transfer that goes into sport when they want to be serious in one area. But yeah, it has been an interesting journey to watch as both a player and as a supporter of rugby.
Was rugby always a straightforward pathway from your perspective?
You know, pathways in general are the challenge across unions in the world in general. Like, it's there's no one cookie cutter solution for, you know, clear pathways. There's certainly, you know, regions in the world that do it amazing and have real clear pathways. And then there's others that are still finding their way, emerging nations, for example. But for me in New Zealand, basketball was actually my first sport. I loved basketball, and I did athletics and volleyball and cricket and touch rugby. And, you know, it wasn't until probably, to be honest, when I was around 17, 18, 19, that I decided to give rugby a real sort of serious go. But before then, you know, I was trying everything. But certainly from an availability of a pathway that exists, one of the key motivations for me to stay in rugby was that I was quite motivated to, you know, achieve certain things. Whereas, say, for example, in basketball, which I would have loved to keep pursuing, maybe the pathway at the time wasn't as strong. And so that's also why I took rugby, which actually probably alludes to what you were saying in terms of those pathways available.
We did a huge series, I think it was probably 2 or 3 months ago at this point, about the future of sport in Ireland, and it was entirely inspired by a letter from Sport New Zealand, which they published, which had been co-signed by all of the major New Zealand sports, where they said that at underage, they were removing as much of the competition as they possibly could and putting athlete enjoyment at the centre of everything, so that if kids enjoyed playing the sport, their rationale was they would continue to play the sport for longer, and so therefore eventually the elite players will surface, maybe a bit later than they would have done previously, but they will surface to the point where you also have then huge more numbers of people playing the sport, and the late bloomers can come through on that as well. Have you noticed a significant difference between how sport in New Zealand is treated, particularly for underage boys and girls, and what you've seen here in Ireland?
Yes, certainly. It's also really important for ourselves to be cognizant of the reality that while a policy like that was introduced and fantastic for a country like New Zealand, who go quite well and punch quite well considering their weight relative to population size, they medal at the pinnacle events, which is brilliant, and so do Ireland in different ways. Where in some ways, when I mentioned around that cookie cutter solution, they can afford to revise their strategy like that, whereas, you know, say for us, we rely on achieving at the high level to support how we grow the game with whatever sport it is. And then it comes down to, I suppose, what's available from a government point of view, a policy where, you know, in New Zealand, physical education is an example. It's every single day. So, you know, the time that kids have in school to exercise, both in structured and then at playtime is in, you know, in the breaks, is maximised as they're older. So that balance of unstructured play with structured play when they enter, you know, a sport they want to do, like gymnastics or whatever it is, that together contributes to, you know, physical literacy, fundamental skills and confidence as they progress into whatever type of sport they want to do. You know, it is difficult when it's not as accessible in other countries, you know, so that there's those factors to also consider.
We don't prioritise it. That's our problem.
Yeah,
we do the hour a week, and that's it.
Well, so we just on that, because the Micheál Martin chat with Joe Malloy, obviously, like if you just listen to what you were saying there, if we have more PE every day, in theory, you've the chance to introduce kids to completely different sports, because a lot of them are just missing out. They don't. This is like, what do you know if you've never missed it?
100%. I'll give you a quick example. I'll give you a family example, actually. My nieces and nephews, you know, when we grew up in this certain environment, it was one thing. You know, the next generation are exposed to swimming, gymnastics, everything that there's such a vast majority of sports that kids naturally will become exposed to. And then through that, there's a different type of confidence that, you know, one child might want to, you know, enter some sport a bit more seriously later or not. But at the end of the day, it's around health and well-being, so that as they're older, optimally, they're the best version of themselves. And where that fits into sport is a huge, sport and recreation and physical activity is such an important part, which is also why the likes of Nikki is so passionate about it, and myself, because at the end of the day, you just want people to be the best version of themselves. And as young kids, you know, we need them to be confident in themselves, fundamental skills, physical literacy, so they can enter different phases of whatever it is they want to pursue.
I think the comparison with New Zealand is one that we need to continue making, because it feels like it's some kind of utopian society down there, and here we are still in the midst of our lockdown going, geez, I wonder if we did things a little bit different, would things be different? Nikki, what was your pathway into hockey then? How did you end up becoming an international hockey player?
Not too dissimilar, I suppose, to Senna. It was probably, you know, I actually was a Gaelic footballer before I was a hockey player, and I suppose at that young age, that was the first real team sport that I was introduced to. I think it was like 6th class or 5th class before I really got introduced to Gaelic football, and I was one of those kids that loved every sport, and, you know, whatever was going, I was going to give it a go. But the Gaelic football was the first time I was part of an actual team, and I really loved going and playing matches, and it became sort of a regular thing every week. And then when I went to secondary school, you know, I had never heard of hockey before. I didn't know what it was, and I remember being in the school uniform shop, and my mom was like, there's this box of sticks, and she hands it to me, and I was like, what is that? And she's like, it's a hockey stick, you're going to need that. And I suppose I was a bit stubborn to the idea at the start, but actually it was a really difficult game to learn. And I think it was the challenge of it that made me, like, motivated me to want to stay with it. And like that, learning then that there was an Olympic Games associated with being a hockey player, there was that motivation then to kind of go, all right, this can actually kind of go somewhere. Now, little did I know how difficult it would actually be to get to an Olympic Games at the time. But yeah, I think, you know, it wasn't a straightforward pathway. I certainly didn't dream of myself being a hockey player when I was younger. But, you know, I got introduced to it. I liked it. I liked the challenge that it brought. And yeah, I was motivated then to see how far I could go with it.
Is that not like absolutely bonkers? Like you're in secondary school. I think you went to high school, school I kind of know of, and they've obviously like hockey would be more prevalent there or whatever. But like you didn't know anything about hockey, yet you became an Ireland international. So what if you'd actually started very, very early, or what if kids started much earlier? Where would they be? Because you took it up so late, yet you achieved what you achieved.
Yeah, but I think it kind of goes back to the fact that, like, you know, playing Gaelic football, there was actually a lot of transferable skills there, like your movement patterns, you know, the way I kind of think and what I try to do on the pitch in hockey is actually quite similar to what I would have done in Gaelic football. And, you know, I loved football. I tried to balance both. That one year I was on the Dublin ladies football team and I got brought into the Irish hockey team, and I wish I could have played both, but it just wasn't possible. And so I think that, as much as, yeah, who knows, would I be better if I started younger, or would I have only really played hockey if that was the case? So I think, you know, I would be a big advocate as well for kids playing as much sport as they can when they're very young, and hopefully that those transferable skills can help them in whatever path that they do go down.
Isn't that the point, Senna, about early specialisation, which the New Zealanders are kind of now railing against and saying actually play everything as long as you possibly can?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Because it's really important as well from a, you know, volunteerism, the parents and the coaches who, you know, for most part, they are really serious about it when it's unnecessary. So just creating and reminding environments of that culture that, you know, it's also really okay to play sport for fun as opposed to it being a pressure sport so young, and the impact that, you know, that could have on mental well-being and those sorts of things.
It's funny, like you both talking about playing sport for fun, and that you're both elite at the sport. So obviously, you know, the fun element and the talent and the hard work and the desire to win and be that best version of yourself, that is kind of the thing I think that separates those club players who just play for fun and you guys, Senna, that there's something else, there's just a little something inside you that says, I'm not going to tolerate just being good, I'm striving for greatness here.
Yeah, you know, and I wonder if Nikki would be of the same opinion, you know, as an elite athlete and the journey it takes to get here, you know, feel really extremely humbled and privileged to be in this position to contribute to representing the country in the sport like rugby. And so, yeah, there is a level of that responsibility. And for us as female rugby players, you know, it's another level of that because we manage so many different roles in our lives and we still then manage to put in, you know, massive dedication to performing for Ireland as best as we can. But within that are values that we, or principles, I suppose, that we value, which include the enjoyment factor, because a lot of us are there because we love it and we enjoy it. So it's just around, you know, everything else that we have to do, all that sort of unseen hard work, dedication that we have to do to enable us to enjoy it on behalf of the country. So that's one thing. The other thing as well, we're in an off season at the moment because we've been training for months and months and months, and we've been going through the roller coaster in the last sort of year and a half. With constant postponements and things like that, very much similar to the hockey girls. And so, you know, in this off season, I've actually been enjoying playing touch rugby. So, you know, we were allowed to have a bit of a break and sort of, you know, just sort of within reason, have a bit of a run around where it still works on you. I can still work on my footwork and speed and agility, and also be in a safe social distance environment where, you know, I can still have fun. So that's an example of how we balance it as well.
And it's obviously working very well. Nikki, I mean, the point that Senna makes about juggling all those other roles and still trying to represent the country. I was just thinking recently, I was away on holidays in Ireland and one of the elite men's teams were there and everything was done for them and it was 5-star and it was like, you know, somebody would bring out the kit was perfectly clean. They basically had to rest, do the training, go for a swim in the pool and then eat and then rest. And it was like, and it's as it should be for that team who are striving to be the best in their sport. But I suspect that we're so far behind that at the moment with so many of our women's teams who, if we were to give them that level of support and financing, the quality of improvement in terms of the performance, it could potentially be the difference in those rest periods and in that downtime and in that extra access to quality strength and conditioning. That's the bit that we still have to finance properly in Ireland.
Yeah, it's one of the evolving discussions that's been happening for a number of years across a number of different sports. But at the same time, that's also a really exciting opportunity to develop those roadmaps to professionalism across whatever sport it is. But it's just around the sustaining part of it, and also being cognizant in different countries where, within unions, the level of resources that have been retained and not retained. There's a whole bunch of factors to consider, but certainly, in the space that we're in, it's exciting because the women's game, certainly in a few sports, is extremely commercial, and we're seeing that in terms of commercial partners wanting to bundle their deals with the women's game. So.
Well, I guess, like, if you want to kind of paraphrase an enigma within an enigma, women's rugby must be very interesting, because rugby itself is actually not played, very much around the world. It's only a select number of countries. And then you have the women's game within rugby. So how big can women's rugby become? And is it almost like the growth could be exponential from where it's coming from?
Yeah, 100%. Recently with World Rugby, we actually launched a new global competition where it's a 3-tier competition, which includes emerging nations right up into the top tiers. And, across that means that the regional competitions are a bit more aligned and structured. And then because of the regional competitions that will exist, and some will be new in some regions, it means that the domestic competitions across the unions can then be underpinned by different types of commercial programs relative to their participation bases and relative to what competitions their men's programs have. Which is also really, really exciting. And that's really important in terms of how roadmaps to professionalism from the different phases that unions and player associations cut across, that makes things a little bit more structured. But obviously within that, there's a host of challenges. But at the same time, there's certainly, it is a space that, I'm pretty optimistic about in the future.
So it feels like there is a plan there, and if the plan works out, then there should be a number of countries who are competitive.
Yeah, it's that's the goal, isn't it? With our World Cups, you want to bridge the gap from the top teams and the bottom teams, and have that product as competitive, or have the our games as competitive as possible, and everyone, it's a win-win for all stakeholders and things like that. So it's an exciting space. I also happen to work in that space, so that's why there's some insight there. Yeah,
I'm sure. It does sound really interesting. It sounds like it's the perfect time to actually talk to you about that whole. It seems certainly in Ireland there's been a grand awakening over the last 5 years in particular about the value of women's sport, and a number of different things factor into that. The Women's Grand Slam obviously factors into it. The success of the women's football matches on TG Carr, the women's football team coming close to nearly qualifying for major tournaments over that period, and the women's underage teams doing particularly well as well, which would have had big audiences. But the commercial support, it's there, but it's still not quite at the level that it needs to be. So what in your view needs to happen to kick us on to that next level where the coverage continues to grow at the rate that it's been going, but we begin to see the early rounds of the championships, for example, having bigger crowds and sellouts for all the Ireland home rugby matches, and the women's hockey team getting the support they deserve? What do you think needs to happen next?
Yeah, that's right. And if you're speaking about Ireland specifically, there's certainly some priorities that we're focused on for the year, and one of those includes the qualification for the World Cup. That's really important. It plays an important role in terms of exactly what you're saying with that next step of how that works. So there's a couple of things at play. The other thing is in terms of, and at the same time, our Sevens girls are playing their first Sevens tournament after so many months off. So best of luck to them at the weekend in England for some training games. So in terms of what we're needing to happen is to have a window. We just need windows available to play. You know, there's certainly a number of other things working in synergy, but at the same time, there are some exciting things happening in the background.
It is interesting as well because, like, you look, Ger, at the difficulty, we'll say, for the FAI of getting a sponsor now, whereas I think you can flip that completely over to women's sport where the opportunities are off the charts to get involved because it's such a feel-good story and you want to get involved in something that has scope, something that's not going to plateau, something that's actually, like, we've only scratched the surface in terms of the potential of it, you know, when you look at what Lidl has done with obviously the Gaelic Games and so forth, and it's, you know, brands want to get associated with something that makes people happy, that they can, you know, relate to, that they can feel part of, that they can grow with, and that's where it's at, basically. You'll just see this explosion of support in terms of big brands, I think, in the years to come, in the near future. And it's the savvy people, men and women at the top level of businesses who recognise this opportunity. I think that'll be rewarded because it's a no-brainer.
That's it. Actually, you've hit it on the head. Sorry, and I must jump in and acknowledge when you're saying the big brands, it's the guys like Guinness who just jumped on board and recognised that 6% of media coverage was dedicated to the women's sport, team sports and individuals, and globally it's 4%. But, you know, in terms of the work that we're doing in the space behind the scenes and what's been happening there, and the level of sort of genuine passion and commitment to drive that forward is super positive to have someone like that. And then also the other brands that are following suit. So that's why I'm just sort of acknowledging that it is a space that I'm really optimistic about. People are starting to recognise the value and the importance and the business sense of investing in women's sport.
I think we've got Nikki Daly back with us as well. Nikki, can you hear us okay?
I can, yeah.
Yeah,
sorry
good stuff. No worries. We've obviously been talking about the evolution of sport and what comes next. From your perspective, with the front row seat that you've had with hockey and understanding Gaelic Games the way you do, are you optimistic that we're going in the right direction? Or do you still think there are some hurdles that we need to get over at the moment when it comes to the commerciality of women's sport, the bums on seats, all the stuff that 20 by 20 would have been talking about, really?
Yeah, I think it's still a bit untapped. I think there's a lot more potential for, you know, brands to invest in women's sport and to get the rewards from that. I know, like, you know, everyone, as you said, everyone loves a good bandwagon, and we know that as well as anyone. But I think, you know, you look at, you know, going back to, like, you know, what we have to sacrifice and commit as players, you know, ourselves to be able to commit to the program. We're pretty much training and committing as professional athletes, but we're not really being supported, I suppose, in that sense fully. So I think there is still a little bit more to be done in terms of hockey. And I think, you know, Gaelic Games, we've seen just there during the week how, you know, they've created that equal funding for both men and women, which is fantastic to see. And that's just the start of more evolution in that sport. And, you know, even in motorsport, it's a small sport here in Ireland. And I think that we have some very talented female racers. I work with Alex Coby, who's a 16-year-old go-karter. She holds multiple track records all over Ireland. And, you know, she's aspiring to get to the W Series, which is a female-only racing series, but it's now partnered with Formula One, which is, you know, one of the biggest platforms in the world. And so, you know, to have, you know, I feel that there's still a lot of potential in the athletes that we have here in this country to be able to support them, get them onto that international stage where they can be successful. And, you know, I think by brands and by broadcasters and media investing in those young or the next generation and the current generation, that, you know, we can start to grow that potential and create more national hero stories like we have been doing over the last number of years.
And increase participation and the general health of the nation. And it's this massive win-win rolling ball of positivity, as Johnny points out, that's good for everybody. You've both been great with your time this afternoon. Thanks a million for sharing your inspiring stories and continuing to inspire. And but wish you both the best of luck for the rest of the year, particularly with the Olympics coming up, if it all happens as well. So thanks a million to Nikki and Stenny for joining us this afternoon. A reminder, of course, why we're actually here. The Ladies Race Day card, the final race at Leopardstown on Friday at 5:25 was the Breast Cancer Ireland Ladies Day Cup. And we were talking about this on the bit that we put out on the radio yesterday, where Johnny really feels like there's an opportunity here for this to become something that is an annual event that gets massive crowds, that gets supported because it has the charity element to it, and it also, of course, has the social element of a nice Friday night at Leopardstown.
Leopardstown, it's a fantastic place to go racing. You know, it's our capital city racecourse. It's our only capital city racecourse. I've fond memories going racing at Leopardstown. I guess there are two kind of separate identities of Leopardstown. One is the Christmas meeting, which is obviously that, you know, bursting urge to get out of the house on Christmas Day, get out on Stephen's Day, meet people, you know, have your hot whiskey and enjoy yourself at Christmas. But then there's that summer meeting kind of fixture list, which has attracted loads of bands and is another attempt to try to get people into racing. But I think the charity and the element of just that, the showpiece event being a Lady Riders race, and the ability to showcase the riders, National Hunt and Flat, that are coming through Lady Riders, the Rachel Blackmores of tomorrow, I suppose, who are riding very good horses at one of the best racetracks in the world, and the quality of the Lady Riders will be key to the outcome of the race, and marrying that then to a charity that is obviously dear to all our hearts, and just a beautiful surrounding. Leopardstown obviously being redeveloped as well. We're all bursting to get racing again. We're all bursting to get to sporting events, and I have lovely images in my head of what this could become, because, you know, Leopardstown doesn't get enough people at its race meetings for conventional meetings, and there's no reason why this shouldn't sell out. 20,000 people in the future, if they're targeted properly, and you're all contributing to a charity. Everyone can relate to cancer. Everyone can relate to breast cancer in you know, in our own kind of families or our general circles. And I think there's, you know, I guess there's just huge potential there, and it'll be something for 12 months on that, you know, they have a long time to plan for, I suppose.
Yeah, and look, 1 in 9 women are diagnosed with breast cancer in their lifetime, and while advances are being made, continued investment is really important. So that's why we're urging you tonight to text CURE to 50300 or get onto breastcancer.com/donate to Breast Cancer Ireland, and most of the €4 in the texting case on most networks, rather, all of the €4 will go if you text CURE to 50300. So you've been listening today and last night to Back on Track, Lessons from a Sporting Life. Yesterday we had Ursula Jacob and Kate Harrington. Tonight we had Senna Nuupu and Nikki Daly talking to us about their lives. If you have any thoughts on that, we'd love to hear from you. You can, of course, text the show on 53106. But we'll see you back for a regular Friday night racing next Friday. Until then, best of luck.